So, folks, I heard that a very interesting comment was made during a certain TYT segment, and I figured I did not want to just rely on a potentially out of context clip. I wanted to actually go through the entire segment and see if perhaps it was truly as bizarre as it seemed to me when I heard it the first time. So we're going back
Now
to
that the election
6 days ago, this video went up, and it is titled "Why Dems Got Their Clocks Cleaned in California." So this is pretty interesting. Let's find out, why did Dems get their clocks cleaned? Were they dirty? How many clocks?
results are finally in California, a state that takes a notoriously long time to tally everything up, Golden State Democrats are a little worried about a clear right-wing shift among voters who used to be dependable Democratic voters. Now, it's not necessarily a right-wing shift. It's more that these are voters who aren't showing up to cast their ballots for Democrats anymore. And they also made some surprising congressional gains, despite what we've noticed with some of these typical Democratic voters staying at home. So let's get into the details. First, important to know that Trump flipped 10 counties red, and the state GOP picked off 3 legislative seats despite being vastly outspent. Okay, so that's some of the evidence that there's been a little bit of change in California, which is a deep blue state. So
Okay, so granted, we are speaking with like 6 more days of additional data here, but a lot of the actual voting data from voter data from the election is now out in the wild, and I gotta say here, the people who stayed home were Democrat, and mobilizing Democrats for 2020 was essentially an anti-Trump endeavor. We covered this a few days ago, right? And in 2020, people were way more concerned about Donald Trump becoming president. And in 2024, there had been 4 more years of like downplaying, of scapegoating, and of generally not no enacted desire to see people accountable for trying to overthrow our country uh, held to account. And so I put this down to a couple of things. Number one, right? Number one, people are way less scared of Trump this time because he's more of a known quantity, and they've had time to adjust and downplay January 6th, right? Number two, Kamala Harris did not appeal to the broad swath of the working class. We've had this data for a little bit, but working class voters stayed home, largely because they were not wooed by her rhetoric. They were not wooed by her, kind of wishy-washy economic policies that were basically like, hey, here's $3, go see yourself a Star War. And then like Dems all patting themselves on the back to say, look at this, we solved that child's hunger problem. And like that child's like, what is even a Star War? Is that an old person thing? And then they all felt even older. But these were like the 2 primary things at play in this election. And I'm interested to see where TYT's analysis takes them.
the biggest shift to the right is seen among Latino voters in the state, which is a huge blow to the Democrats.
Well, see, so this is interesting, right? Because in what we talked about the other day was how a 2D projection of the election results would show a rightward shift versus a 3D projection, which is basically taking into account the people who stayed home, indicates that it was not a shift. Donald Trump's support remained stable from 2020 to 2024, What ended up happening was Democrats didn't show up. That's what happened, right? So framing it as a conservative shift for the country, for the body politic, is inaccurate and presents this idea that I think TYT might be going along with here. I certainly know Jen Guger is going along with it. Of the country has shifted right, and you need to chase that shift in order to build bridges and build a movement with the far right. But that doesn't work if it's simply a case of demotivated Democrats.
Clearly, historically, Democrats had been able to solidify support among Latino voters in California thanks to backlash over a previous proposition. It was known as Proposition 187. And that was an initiative that was targeting immigrants in the country illegally. And that moved Latino voters decisively toward the Democratic Party. However, now polling suggests that the Prop 87 era is over. And Latino voters, unsurprisingly, are concerned about affordability in a state like California. High taxes, high housing prices, and they feel that the Democratic Party hasn't done enough to help them with this.
And they're not wrong. This is why a lot of the bigger picture analysis has really focused in on the fact that over like the last several election cycles, both midterm and broader mainstream election years, the country's been swinging back and forth. There has not been stability, and that is historically an indication that people are not having their needs met, and so they're bouncing between political parties in the hope that one of them may off chance do something better. So there are these people who are ping-ponging, right? But also, again, if Donald Trump's support remained constant, the focus here needs to be motivating Democrats. And the thing that motivates Democrats, the working class, tends to be economic policies that actually provide tangible benefit, that are universalized, that are not, means tested, etc.
So a post-election poll conducted by a Democratic pollster named David Binder found that affordability and high cost of living in the state were the preeminent concerns among California's Latino voters. More than 3/4 of respondents said that California state government policies made prices much higher or somewhat higher. 53% disapproved of how the government is addressing the economy, including jobs and the cost of living.
And I think it's worth pointing out here that, and Sam and Moose, you are correct. Support fell on both sides. It just fell, I think it was like 2 or maybe 3% for Trump, but like 6% for Harris is my understanding. Something along those lines, which is a large fall in support and in turnout. But we're seeing similar trends globally, and that is very specifically because of neoliberalism. The trickle-down economics of the Reagan era that were mainstreamed into both party politics in the 90s under Clinton, and then exported around the world, render the Democratic and the left-wing establishment parties incapable of actually addressing in any meaningful or tangible way the failures of the capitalist system, because both parties are then complicit and encouraged to enable the fleecing of the country, the privatization, so that rich people can continue getting richer. That's the entire premise of neoliberalism. The whole push for privatization, the whole undoing of public protections and economic protections and reforms and social welfare systems. These are all parts of neoliberalism, and they are basically designed to kill all of the protections that keep us safe from the free market. The free exercise of the market historically has killed so many people around the world. So many people. And it still does. But workers have fought and bled and died for reforms that make it a little bit harder for these companies to screw us over, right? Neoliberalism is the capitalist project to take that away. To take away, your guaranteed weekend, the regulations that keep you safe at work so that, your boss can't order you to throw your body into the machinery to, get 1% more efficiency out of the factory. Stuff like that. That people died for that. One of the maybe one of the most metal sayings is, the regulations of OSHA are written in blood. And that's because people literally died for almost every single one of those regulations, So that's kind of when we're talking about establishment politics and politicians. This is why a lot of them seem fundamentally incapable of addressing meaningfully economic woes and concerns from working class people.
And guys, I can't emphasize enough how much resentment starts to build in a state where taxes are very high, but you also experience your quality of life diminish year after year after year. And you also see that you have less and less buying power because of, there's inflation throughout the country, but that inflation is even more pronounced in a state like California, especially when it's tied to housing prices.
Yeah. So look, there's an oddity here of the Democrats picking up 3 national seats in California. We'll get to that in a second, and I have a couple theories on that. But overall, the Democrats got their clock cleaned in California. And so when we talk about why, it's super important that we're honest with ourselves, because if we're not, we'll just keep making the same mistake. And
is it going to be trans people?
The biggest state in the country will go more and more Republican. My God, if the Republicans capture California, it's over. It's over nationally completely. And we're not close to that now.
No.
Okay. So Adam Schiff, who was, in my opinion, a terrible candidate, ran against Steve Garvey, who had almost no money, and he still beat him by 19. But 19 is closer than what normally happens,
yes,
especially because Garvey had no money at all, right? And so you see this red wave coming through the counties, affecting the state legislature, et cetera. And so when you ask them why they're going in this direction, the economy is a big part of it.
Right.
Like, so, and to me, the most critical stat, I don't know if you were going to get to this, Anna, but Trump only picked up 75,000 votes in California in this election. But Kamala Harris, the Democratic leader, lost 1.8 million votes from Joe Biden.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because the entire framing at the beginning of this story about like how it swung massively, California swung right. Dems got their clocked cleaned in California, and it's like, oh, Trump only picked up 75,000 votes in a state with what's the population of California? What is it? 38.9 million people? I have to put out there that like the framing at the beginning of this really makes it seem like you're going in a different direction here.
Yes, that's true. Yep.
And so what that shows you is not that the people woke up in California and were like, oh my God, I think Trump and the Republicans are so amazing and they're wonderful, and we're now all Republicans. No, but they woke up and said, the Democrats haven't done something for me in so
One-Eyed Heathen, thank you for the $5 super chat. Off topic. So, with better paying conditions for workers here, how do we keep companies from moving to countries with less or no worker protections? Well, one way is that we adopt the democratic worker model, which I think would be great. Like, oh, there are ways we can implement this, right? And I've talked about it before, but it's been a bit. I think that if you are a major company, right? You keep a town alive, right? You want to leave that town? You want to leave that town? I think that maybe there should be some kind of, the workers get to buy your equipment. The workers get to buy their workplace and do with it what they will. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense. You want to go manufacture cars elsewhere? Okay, good luck out there. We're going to be continuing to manufacture cars here. That factory going to stay open. Those workers still going to keep their jobs. They're just going to keep their jobs. You are actively making more competition. Now, this is very similar to Bernie Sanders' proposed plan. It never got through Congress, obviously, but one of his proposed plans was that if you are wanting to sell your private corporation, the law would then stipulate that you first have to give your workers the right to buy that company if they so choose at a fair market rate. So before you can shop it around to other venture capital or whatever, you have to offer it to the people who work for you, which I think is a really, really good idea. I think that would be amazing. And I would further add that if a company is too big to fail and it fails, I think that company should get a bailout. But then it belongs to the workers. The workers then run collectively that business. I think that if you fail your business and you need, billions of dollars of taxpayer money to bail you out, like, remember the bank crisis? Remember Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? They had to get bailed out by the U.S. government because they were too big to fail. Guess what? Now those are owned by the workers, or we nationalize them. We nationalize them. We bring back postal banking. I've got a lot of ideas here. I'm just spitballing, right? The United States is not a powerless entity to enforce these things, as we're going to find out when Donald Trump is president. Hopefully, we don't find out too hard, because I know a lot of us are in not great economic conditions. But historically, when the U.S. taxpayer has bailed out private companies, those private companies continue to be private, and they just pocket the money. They do stock buybacks and escalate the value of their stocks so that they can gamble on the market more. Like, that's crazy. Hello. So effectively, it would force a private corporation to be a worker co-op. Essentially, yeah. Or at least provide a lot of incentives for a private corporation to become a worker co-op. Because not all workers want to band together and collectively buy a company. That is hard, but it should be their right to decide whether or not they do that. Let's see here. Yeah, the airlines got bailouts, true. I also think that when the government invests into research on vaccines and stuff, we should as a nation collectively own that patent. Did I miss the thing? Nope.
Oh, so long that no, I'm not going to go vote for you because I have to, or it's my moral duty, or you're going to yell at me. No, you didn't deliver, so I'm not voting for you.
That's exactly right. Yes. So Harris got 1.8 million votes less than Joe Biden did in 2020 in the state of California. And so, look, a lot of this has to do with people who just didn't feel motivated to show up and vote. Some people, like myself, did show up and vote, but I did not vote for either presidential candidate. And so,
Dog, so many of our lefties are so deeply unserious.
huge swaths of Latino voters specifically decided, I'm not going to vote for a presidential candidate here. And overall, there was a 9-point drop in voter turnout in the state. Now, a Republican consultant by the name of Mike Madrid says, I really want people to understand that the lack of voting, the lack of civic engagement is in and of itself a political statement. I totally agree with that. He continues, they finally left the bad relationship where this person is telling them over and over, I understand you, I get your needs, I hear what you're telling me, but then does not produce over and over and over again. Now they're finally saying, you know what, I'm out.
And you know what's really sad about this? This is coming from a Republican consultant. This is a Republican strategist who's like just going out and saying exactly how neoliberalism fails. The main issue here, is that a lot of people lack the vocabulary and the understanding of politics to understand what is happening, and that the Democrats are not overall aligned with leftism or Marxism or socialism or any of these far left ideologies that the right constantly tries to apply to them. They are aligned with capital. They are aligned with neoliberalism, and they have been for almost 30 years at least. 34 maybe, 35 now. So the issue here is that a lot of people can identify that core problem, but it's not being conveyed to people in a way that is meeting them where they're at when it comes to their political journey, And it's frustrating. As like a leftist, it is frustrating to see this and not have this explained, right? Because it's not just like, oh man, Democrats just don't know what to do. Oh, they're not like infomercial bumbling it, guys. I know it might seem like it, but like the wider Democratic Party at the top, they're not doing this by accident. The people who run the party, for the most part, are engaged in a neoliberal project to enrich themselves and their donors. That's the core thing. And a lot of people see the mechanisms, but then they'll buy the excuses for inaction over and over and over again. And this is why we need to get involved with the democratic process. We need to grow this grassroots support, and we need to crush these neoliberals. We need to crush them at their own game. We got to do that. And this is why I advocate for people to get involved with their local party and also to get involved with DSA, because we need both kinds of pressure. We need both.
And then the final statement from Mike Madrid is, in many ways, that's worse for Democrats. And this is so true. They really do have a hill to climb here, because they're not going to be able to get those voters back until they establish trust. So there's a really big burden on them, especially when the primary driver of affordability is housing. It's not like you can solve this by the midterms. And so this piece focuses on the uphill battle for Democrats in the state of California leading into the 2026 midterm elections. And by the way, in 2026, California is electing a new governor, thank God. So we'll see how that all plays out. But there are the ballot initiatives as well, because I think that's where it's become abundantly clear that voters in California have reconsidered their more left-wing positions on certain issues. So California voters actually approved 8 out of the 9 general election ballot measures endorsed by the state's Republican Party. The 9th, they just remained neutral on, and that was the one that would amend California's state constitution to protect gay marriage. Also, Prop 36, which imposes stricter penalties on some theft and drug crimes, easily passed with 70% of.
Oh, also, just as an FYI, because I don't think they're going to bring it up in here, but a lot of these propositions had virtually no support from the Democrat state party. I looked this up several weeks ago, like what was going on with the propositions in California, and basically most of them did not have significant party support or advertisements about them or any kind of like easily accessible information on them for Democrats. The people and the money all went to influencing people to vote against these ballot measures from Republicans. We covered one of the examples of this a bit ago. Literally the same people who were behind the same tech billionaires and millionaires and investors who were behind the recall of Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, they also backed a lot of these propositions. They backed a lot of this stuff. It was when I talked about it when we were going over. Cenk was talking about the city in California that recalled its vote, was trying to recall its mayor. Anyway, I did a whole deep dive on that. You should check it out. I don't know if it's on YouTube yet. I'll make sure it gets up there. But yeah.
Voters in favor of it. And that reversed a decade-long trend in the state of California that embraced criminal justice reform and basically went against the more tough-on-crime policies.
Yeah, so when they ask folks, why you either went in Trump's direction, or Republican direction, or didn't vote, the two things that stood out by far.
People don't want government that's tough on crime. Literally the recall vote had to be backed by like, 10-15 million dollars in a local race. The narrative is being formed by millionaires and billionaires who have untold amounts of money that none of us can even comprehend or dream of. And they're just pouring it into local elections and then propagating narratives through their, jointly owned social media and news sites. Like the whole blowback against policies that reject cash bail. That's not coming from like the general population, because guess what? Like cashless bail works. By all the metrics, it works. The only reason people do not support cash bail is because of Republican money flooding different local races on these propositions. It's unfortunate.
Or the most where Democrats don't deliver. What have we been telling you on the show for 20 straight years? You got to deliver. If you don't deliver, at some point you're going to lose these folks. And you can scream at them all you want. Oh, if you're a Latino, you must vote Democrat. Well, not anymore. They don't feel any obligation to. Number 2 reason was crime. And what did we tell you over the last 2 years? Crime, right? Yeah. And a lot of folks yelled at us and said, no, let's all pretend it doesn't exist. You can pretend all you like. The voters actually feel it or they don't feel it. And it's not about just right-wing narratives or messaging, et cetera, because what was the equivalent of Prop 36 to increase penalties was tried 2 years ago and it didn't, I'm sorry, I think 4 years.
Like, I'm real sorry, guys. Oh yeah, crime. We've been talking about it for 2 years. It's not the dunk you think it is. This is a graph of crime rates in California over time. Here's property crime rate. It peaked in 1980 and has been going down ever since. What about violent crime? It peaked in 1992 and has been going down ever since, with a slight increase from 2021 to 2023. And maybe that could be the result of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. But, like, the idea that, like, crime has massively spiked is just not true. No one's saying crime isn't happening. Crime always happens. God. And I found that out with like a 3-second Google.
Years ago, and it didn't work because people didn't feel crime. Now they feel the crime and they're like, oh yeah.
But they feel the crime because they're being told constantly that it's a problem. Like, here's the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. They had to put out a story back in October here. New FBI data. California's crime rate is at record lows, yet crime wave lies persist. This is data from the Department of Justice. Dang, that's crazy, dog.
Yeah. So look, 9 counties go to Trump. 8 out of 9 ballot measures goes to the Republicans, including the most important one, Prop 36, to increase penalties. As Anna pointed out, 7 out of 10, not close.
8 out of 9.
No, 7 out of 10 voters on Prop 36.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, you're right.
And that's in a massively Democratic state, right? So now when you go to the oddity of the Democrats who won the national seats, congressional seats, as the red wave was taking over California otherwise. So my theories on that are, number one.
Wait, so neoliberals and the GOP are creating crime? Unironically, yes. Their policies keep poor people poor and make the rich richer. And what causes crime? Generally speaking, it's poverty. Poverty and crime are extraordinarily correlated.
None of the stories talked about it, but we always talk about it in the red states, and we never talk about it in the blue states, even though people acknowledge, oh, the blue states do it too, which is gerrymandering. So I don't know how much of a factor that was, because all of the articles are religiously avoiding it.
Yeah, I'm gonna get into that actually, real quick, because I looked into it. But before I do, I have to give you this. I've never read a quote that resonated with me more than this one does, so I'm gonna read it, okay? So Jessica Milan Patterson, who's the chairperson for the state Republican Party, says,
Actual Jake, thank you so much for the raid. Welcome, Raiders.
That, the voters' approval of things like Prop 36 was a sign that voters were increasingly agreeing with her party on ideas that.
No. See, this is insane, right? Like, this is the insane thing to me. And this is why I've started like critiquing more TYT videos as if they are conservative, because she's literally in this article taking the word for the chairperson of the California Republican Party. Like, gee, I wonder if this person's maybe a bit biased about their interpretation of the data. They got 75,000 more votes in a state of almost 40 million people. And yes, we're doing a really great job convincing more people. They got like 0.001% more votes this time around. So like, I don't think this is evidence of a swing towards the Republicans. This is evidence of neoliberalism failing the people of California, leading to them not voting for Democrats. Full stop.
First,
Had to crack
the
my
first
back.
step to bring them over to
Hey,
GOP
Erica.
candidates and eventually identifying as Republicans themselves. That's not the part that I completely agree or resonates with me. This one does. You don't get red-pilled overnight. It's the issues that affect your everyday life first, and then you connect them with people, and then you connect it with a party. That is so true, and that is what we're trying to get across to people. When you're affected day to day by quality of life issues, and all you hear from the Democratic Party is shut up, no, it's not happening, and if it's happening, it's not that big of a deal. Man, that really does red pill people. It builds resentment toward the party. And I really think that Democrats need to pivot away from that, because they're gonna keep losing if they think that that type of treatment of voters, that type of disrespect toward voters is gonna get them anywhere.
So I'm gonna pause here because that was crazy. So folks, part of what was said there was true, right? Which is that if there is a persistent need that is affecting your day-to-day life, you know, your children have to skip a meal, or you have to skip a meal in order to feed your kids, you are having to scrimp and save in order to remain housed, you know, things are going very poorly, and then you turn on the news and you see that somehow the economic data is indicating everything's fine. And, you know, you're not going to feel very motivated to turn out for the people who are telling you everything is fine and who are telling you that nothing is going to fundamentally change. You know, these are not messages that appeal to you as a voter, right? Now, the part of that that is not true is that the issue here is what Democrats say to these people, right? The issue is not, oh, Dems just aren't listening enough. They're not treating these people, you know, with enough politeness. That's an aesthetic, right? Because they can be polite as hell while they're screwing you over, right? The real issue here is, are those Democrats addressing your day-to-day needs, or are they not? And they need to change to address those underlying needs. Otherwise, you lose the voters. And you don't necessarily lose them as, you know, Republican vote and they turn into Republicans. You lose them as in they stay home because they got to feed their family. They got shit to do. They're busy. They got to clean their apartment. All right? That's the issue. It's not whether or not they're being, you know, considerate and like smiling enough at you, or using the right pronouns even. What matters here is what policies they support and put forward. And the answer is that the mainstream Democratic Party right now is pushing these neoliberal ideas. And that isn't going to get them anywhere when the population is frankly in crisis economically.
So look, I do something that apparently not a lot of other people in politics or media do.
Wait, people think the economy is bad because of vibes, nothing more? Genuinely? No. The minimum wage has been stagnant for like 50 years. That people cannot afford housing. The thing that makes our economy look like it's doing okay is that like people work 3 jobs in order to get by. And on top of that, they are like, all of their time is taken up by work, and what little time they have for themselves is taken up by simply, you know, engaging with luxuries, because luxuries are so much cheaper than they were, you know, 30 years ago. But you know what's not cheaper? You know, it's exponentially more expensive. All of the things you need to survive, like rent or, or food. Like those things are more expensive. And the people who are at the bottom end of the economy are workers. Those were the people who used to show up for the Democratic Party, and this is the first time those people have been lost by the Democratic Party. This is the first election where they've been lost. So we need policies and politicians who are willing to embrace pro-worker policies.
I talk to normies, people who don't follow politics and news religiously, right? And so in California, whenever you talk to normies and you ask them about Biden, what's the first thing they would say? Too old. Every single person, Democrat, Republican, it didn't matter because they all have eyes. And so if you're not watching Morning Joe and having him brainwash you every morning about, no, he's young and dynamic, you're going to see Biden.
Where are you getting that? I don't have time to derail into a conversation about the economic plight of people today, but I will just point out that one of the things that destabilizes countries more than anything else is wealth inequality and disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And wealth inequality is higher in America today than it was during the French Revolution. So, just something to think about.
And once, twice, and go, he's way too old.
Maybe that's not a good sign for a healthy economy.
What's he doing running for office, right? But in the case of California, specifically in this topic that we're talking about, every single normie said crime's out of control. We're worried, we're scared, we're nervous. I had a friend that had this happen to. I had this that happened to that. So you see it in the stats, you see it in the anecdotes, you see it in every single normal person that you talk to. So when our side said no, they're all being, nervous Nellies for no reason. They're imagining it. What it did was it doubled down on their anger towards Democrats. Because they said, number one, I'm angry at you because there's crime and you're not doing anything about it. And number two, when you get...
Yeah, no, this is, I don't know how many of you saw the Breakfast Club discussion between Olayemi Olurin and New York City Mayor Eric Adams. But this is almost exactly the same kind of talking points Eric Adams tried to employ, which was like, people are really afraid to use the subway. And she responded, why are people afraid to use the subway if the crime is down? Because he was bragging about how low the crime was on the subway. He's like, well, because there's a lot of crime on the subway. And they believe there's a lot of crime on the subway. And it's like, why do they believe there's a lot of crime on the subway? It's because he keeps talking about how there's so much crime on the subway. He's making people afraid. The way he talks about the issue makes people afraid, even though the data doesn't back it up.
Gaslight me and tell me there is no crime, then I'm starting to get mad at you, right?
Yep.
And so that's when the red pilling happens.
Kamala even had pro-housing policy platform. Kamala Harris said she was going to build millions of homes. That's not a pro-housing policy platform. Both parties said that. This is the thing, right? It's like, oh, you stupid voters, you could have looked up this shit. And it's like, yeah, but guess what? You're doing politics poorly if you can't reach those people. You are doing politics poorly if you as a presidential candidate cannot make national news, that you want to ensure that the same way there's a turkey on every table or a chicken in every pot or whatever, you want to ensure that everyone has a pot and everyone has a home to make that chicken in. You gotta make that a key part of your platform. You've got to be talking up how you want to ensure that every man, woman, and child in America has a bed to sleep in at night. You've got to actually sell that shit. And the issue here is that Kamala Harris never once during her campaign was willing to do that because her economic policies were being dictated to her by her brother-in-law, who is an Uber executive. One of the rich assholes at the company that is responsible for running all kinds of independent transport businesses and public utilities out of business. That is the entire basis for their business model. And you know what? He was still presenting better policies than what Donald Trump was putting forward. But I gotta say something. slightly better than abysmal is not enough to get people out to vote, especially when they're like, well, it's not working for me right now. Maybe the other guy will do something better for me, you know? And then they just throw up their hands and they're like, what will be, will be. And then they go about with their day. So, like, if you're a politician and you're just like, well, all the people I serve are morons, you're not going to get anywhere. You're just not. If you're like, well, they're just not smart enough to understand my brilliant plan. Well, guess what? Tough nuts. Politics is helping people to understand. Yeah, she meant expanding the suburbs. Yeah, part of the issue of like just saying you want to build homes is that America builds a lot of homes. It's just that the developers that are receiving, incentives to build homes primarily build luxury homes because then instead of having to sell, 80% of the homes they build, they just have to sell like 20% of the homes they build. Doesn't matter that those homes are going to sit empty if you only sell like, if you build 10 but then you make back the cost when you sell 2, like what incentive do you have, or you're making a profit when you sell 2? Like, what incentive do you have to adopt a business model where you have to sell, 8 of them? Like, that's for them, it makes economic sense to not build housing for the poor. I don't know. This is a whole other thing. I'm gonna move on.
Yeah.
So we're trying to block that, stop that from happening. And you've seen some of the fights that have happened on our side. But so let me get back to why.
Also, just like not even batting an eye when his co-host like endorses red pill content. God, how long until an Andrew Tate guest? Jesus.
The Democrats is the national level one in California, because one is partly gerrymandering. Anna, you said you were going to get into that. I don't know if you've got more on that. Secondly, we had way more money than the Republicans did in California. So we were not only able to spend more money on ads, but we got out the vote better. We did same day registration. And some of these we barely won by like 800 votes and 100.
Yeah, because you can put all the money you want into the actual campaign, but if you are offering someone only marginally better than dog shit, that's not great motivation to get out,
160 votes, et cetera. And so we did a good job with that and had more money. But finally, the issues mattered because none of them ran on democracy. None of them ran on what the Biden and Kamala Harris ran on.
Correct.
They all ran on 3 major things. One is get prices down, okay? Like,
in a democracy, voters have as much responsibility to the country as politicians do to the voters. Yeah, but also under capitalism, people are busy as fuck trying to stay alive. Like you got to meet people where you're at, and unfortunately, the main constituency for the Democrats is the working class. So you work with what you got, and if your entire like political history as a platform is opposing unions and like fucking over organized labor, well, those are the main mechanisms by which people are radicalized and engaged into your political party. Like they don't pay attention to the news because they don't have time to watch it, but you know what they do pay attention to? What's going on at work, because they have to be there in order to be alive.
kitchen table issues, economic issues. Number 2, abortion. Abortion made a huge difference in California, and it made people reluctant to vote for Republicans on the national level because we know abortion's not getting taken away in California, but we're worried it might get taken away nationally if you send the wrong people to Congress. By the way, California voters, that's super rational. Way to go. You voted at the local level in the way that you want, but at the national level, you did the right thing by voting for Democrats so your abortion rights don't get taken away, in my opinion. And lastly, and this one's super important, they all ran on pro-Prop 36.
Yeah, they did.
They all said, let's increase the penalties for crime, and they won. So they were able to take that wave of Prop 36, and instead of trying to fight against it, it would have washed them out. They joined it so that they could actually win, because they were, not because they're bad guys, but because they were actually addressing what they're.
Yeah, I wonder why. I wonder why so much support came in. I wonder why. So strange. Oh, what is that? $16 million were put into the ad campaign for Proposition 36 in California by big retailers and law enforcement. Wow, that's crazy. You mean Walmart spent $3 million on on advertising why you should vote for increased penalties for shoplifting? That's wow. Wild to not mention that. Now you might also say, well, but you know, the Democratic groups also spent money on that. Republicans spent 3 times more money on Proposition 36 than Democrats did. Interesting thing to point out. Interesting thing to point out.
Their voters wanted.
Exactly. That you're exactly right about that.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate.
Yeah. Also, if in case you are wondering where that is from Cap Radio, which is a yeah. It's pretty good coverage over here. Nonprofit journalistic entity. Let's go. Anyway, that was wild as hell. Was I wrong in my appraisal? No. No, you were not.